Chile is a country with a literary history so rich it's almost ridiculous. From Pablo Neruda and Isabel Allende and José Donoso to newer names like Benjamin Labatut, a lot of good shit has come out of Chile and will continue to come out of Chile. Now, I know next to nothing about it, but I'm not going to let ignorance stop me from speaking authoritatively on a subject that I want to talk about. The first name that really opened my eyes to Chilean literature was an author by the name of Roberto Bolaño. Maybe you've heard of him. Novels like The Savage Detectives and 2666 have gained notoriety in certain online literature circles I have been unfortunate enough to find myself in. Now, if you don't know about Bolaño, you should. He was born in Chile, but moved to Mexico as a young man. Now, he would spend most of his life globe-hopping, eventually dying in Spain, but one of the most significant periods of his life, a time which would immensely impact not only his work but the rest of his life, was spent in the country he was born in. Bolaño returned briefly to Chile in the 1970s. Now, if you know anything at all about Chile in the 1970s, you probably have some idea of where this is headed. Bolaño, like many other left-wing artists and activists, was jailed. They were thrown into prison by the fascist dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, who seized power in a military coup that was backed by the US that resulted in the death of the democratically elected socialist leader Salvador Allende. Pinochet and his thugs also kickstarted a campaign of disappearings and violence, which is difficult to comprehend in both its scale and brutality. They were dropping people out of helicopters. Let me repeat that. They were dropping people out of helicopters. They loaded the helicopters up with political prisoners, flew into the sky, and dropped them out of the helicopters. Now that is some horrific shit, some terrifying shit. But, in the interest of fairness, I do have to say, points for creativity. Bolaño might well have suffered the same fate, or a worse one, because there were worse fates than being thrown out of a helicopter in Pinochet's Chile, if not for a stroke of luck. Now, as he would go on to tell it, some former school friends of his were guards where he was being jailed, and they recognized and freed him before he had a chance to experience any of the diverse array of torture techniques which were being applied to many other Chileans. The Pinochet dictatorship was a harrowing period, not only for Bolaño, but for all of Chile. Now, as to how it impacted Bolaño personally, well, it's impossible to say for sure, but given how much of his work grapples with not only the Pinochet regime, but the fascism which inspired it, I think we can make a pretty reasonable guess. It also gave Bolaño a reason to write Nazi literature in the Americas, a little book of lies which sound like truths that just so happens to be one of my favorite short story collections. I'm really fascinated by this idea, this concept of an author, they get down at their desk, they sit down to write a book, and they just decide in their heads that that book must be full of lies. It goes so against the typical ethos of fiction, and it's delightful. Nabokov is probably the master of this. Lolita is a masterpiece in the art of lying, so much so that the discourse surrounding the novel boils down to being a litmus test for how well someone can tell that they're being lied to. Then, of course, Nabokov also wrote Pale Fire, a book full of so many different lies which are being told on such a staggering amount of levels. I mean, when you're reading Pale Fire, you're not reading Pale Fire, you are deciphering it. Give it a try sometimes, it's a great book. There are other works I enjoy which dabble in lying, mainly through the use of the unreliable narrator. The Nabokov novels I just mentioned are prime examples of this, as well as House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, which uses multiple unreliable narrators to trap the reader within a labyrinth of contradicting information. In this way, House of Leaves is much like my ex-wife. When it comes to Nazi literature in the Americas, though, there's this specific bent to the lies that makes them especially juicy. In fact, the lies are so odd, I'm not sure if lying is the best word for what's going on in this work. I titled the video before I wrote it, though, so I'm stuck with lies for now, and you are too, frankly. We're all trapped in this hellscape nightmare together. As to what makes Nazi literature in the Americas special, well, if I were to put it simply, I would say that it is the most believable collection of lies that I have ever read. For those of you unfamiliar with the book, it presents itself as an encyclopedia of fascist and fascist-adjacent authors and poets, separated into chapters based on lineage or on shared artistic interest. Now, these chapters are further divided into the biographies of the authors and poets, micro-stories within short stories. Take, for example, the opening chapter, which deals with the Mendiluce clan. It begins by detailing the life of Edelmira Thompson de Mendiluce, who, after marrying a rich man, composes a series of middling works and travels the world, eventually ending up in Nazi Germany. She meets Hitler and has the funny mustache man take a photo holding her daughter. Edelmira continues to travel, continues to hack away at novels and publishing and critical analyses, and eventually dies in obscurity. Her life story is communicated with stark detail and clarity in less than 15 pages. Edelmira's daughter, Luz, receives an entry as well. Hers is 8 pages long. She's described as treasuring the photo of herself in Hitler's arms, and she has it set in a rich silver frame. Despite this, she rarely identifies the photo as being of herself. Often she lies about the baby in the photo, identifying the infant as one of Hitler's nieces. On the rare occasions she tells the truth about the photo, she says that being held by the future loser of World War II was, quote, one of the happiest moments of her life. She even goes so far as to title a poem, I Was Happy with Hitler. Talk about being set up to fail. Luz's entry, only the third in the encyclopedia, is endlessly fascinating because of contradictions like these. Why would Luz lie if she was so proud of the photograph? The entry makes it clear that Luz had a reputation for being a far-right activist, so it's not as if her fascism was a secret. Also fascinating is how Luz spends a considerable amount of time cruelly mocking gay men for who they are, but then she goes on to fall hopelessly in love with a female poet named Claudia, who rebuffs Luz because, 1, Claudia is not a lesbian, and 2, according to Claudia, the two were, quote, mortal enemies. I'm a Trotskyite, and you're a fascist shit. Claudia is later kidnapped and murdered. Her body is found in a garbage dump. It is implied she was a victim of the Pinochet dictatorship's murder campaign. Luz is so heartbroken she gets into her car and crashes it into a gas station, blowing herself up in the process. Apparently, she was unable to reflect on the possibility that her choice of politics would harm those closest to her. Again, what's remarkable about Luz's story is how realistically it is situated in real life. Her entry is only a few pages long, and yet full knowledge of a vivid life is able to be gleaned from the short time we spend with her. The entirety of the Mendiluce clan chapter is 24 pages long, and in those 24 pages, Edelmira, her son Juan, and Luz are brought to life with staggering effectiveness. Bolaño uses a variety of techniques to consistently paint these brief life portraits, and perhaps the most crucial among them is the voice he uses. The encyclopedic tone is dry, but it never loses its wit. When Luz Mendiluce dies, her chapter ends like this. The next day, Luz set off for Buenos Aires in her Alfa Romeo. Halfway there, she crashed into a gas station. The explosion was considerable. Besides the choice of tone, Bolaño will also use this interesting technique where he layers the imagined works and lives of the far-right poets and authors he invents alongside the works and lives of real-world individuals, Pablo Neruda and Allen Ginsberg, to name a few. This creates a sort of haze in the mind of the reader. You know what you're reading is fictional, but the details are so concrete, the times and places and people so specific, it's easy to lose track of who did and didn't really exist. Further obfuscating the truth is the epilogue. Titled Four Monsters, it is a comprehensive catalog of secondary figures, people who appear in entries but did not receive their own, a list of publishing houses, and a bibliography made up entirely of fictionalized books. It's not such a far stretch to say that one could compile a timeline from all the information given to the reader by Bolaño, thereby creating an in-depth history of a subset of American writing which did not exist at all. Now, why is the epilogue titled Four Monsters? Well, that's because you have to have a terrifying lack of hose to be interested in it at all. There's another little neat aspect to being this thorough, this consistent with the encyclopedia presentation, and that's when you flip it on its head, it becomes that much more effective. I love quite a few of the entries in here. Irma Carrasco's, for example, showcases the horror of a life spent being abused, with perhaps the most effective and moving passage in the entire book, Irma's final confrontation with the man who beat her senseless every chance he got. I won't spoil it for you here, but trust me on this one, it is harrowing and worth your time to read. There is also The Many Masks of Max Mirebalais, a story about a plagiarizer who steals so many faces for himself to where he loses himself in the process. He writes many different works under many different names by stealing the work of better artists, and he often writes in the service of Aryan supremacy. He is eventually imprisoned and is released, and then dies in obscurity, which is a running theme in Nazi literature in the Americas, And with him are found many half-finished works of many of his alter egos. Max is fun because he really embodies the work's fascination with truth and lies. Here is a man who builds a literary career, in fact builds many literary careers, off the backs of the work of others. He lives a life full of anything but the truth, but is incapable of seeing his life for what it is. There are so many stories like Max's, and so many of them are fascinating, even if they're only a page or two long. And then you reach the last entry. Titled The Infamous Ramirez Hoffman, it is by far the longest entry, a single story crossing 25 pages. Although it is about the titular Ramirez Hoffman, a truly reprehensible human being, it is also the crumbling of the author's distance between himself and his subject matter. You see, Bolaño himself features as a character, directly commenting on the heinous life and deeds of Hoffman, and he's narrating for once in the first person. Hoffman was a pilot for Pinochet, Bolaño a prisoner in the La Peña detention center. He witnesses Hoffman write poems in the sky using his airplane. One line of one of the sky poems reads, quote, "Good luck to everyone in death." Midway through the skywriting, the guards at the prison force Bolaño and the other prisoners back inside, back into their small, dank cells, marching them towards inevitable suffering. Remember, this account is entirely fictitious. Years pass. Bolaño, now a free man, is residing in Spain. One day, he is recruited by a policeman to help hunt down Ramirez Hoffman, as Bolaño is one of the only individuals in the country who is capable of identifying the murderer. Bolaño and the policeman travel to Lloret, a small town in Spain, where Bolaño has a chilling encounter with the murderous poet-fascist who is now an old, broken man, hiding from a past that he took glee in creating for himself. Oh, it's so fucking good. It's so fucking good. You have no fucking idea. The flip at the end here with Bolaño unable to hold his past in any longer, it's like a baseball bat to the face. It's like... It's such an intriguing examination of justice and what that really means, and it's also an intriguing examination of the author himself. You might wonder what I mean by that. Well, remember, this is all a lie. All of these people I've spoken to you about, from the Mendiluces to Irma Carrasco to Ramirez Hoffman, none of them existed. Bolaño lied to you. He lied to you to build an endlessly fascinating work of art, a unique literary curio that says perhaps more about his author than it really does about fascism. Because the invention goes even further than the pages. Earlier on, I told you that Bolaño had spent time as a prisoner of Pinochet's dictatorship in Chile. Remember that? You remember when I told you how much of an impact that had on him and how he would go on to write multiple works about the evils of that dictatorship? Bolaño lied. He, in all likelihood, was not taken prisoner by Pinochet. He probably wasn't even in the country when the kidnappings and murders were taking place. Friends of his would theorize that he felt an immense guilt over not being in Chile when the coup took place, and this guilt at his inability to act would impact him for the rest of his life. Now, this is just a theory from some of his friends and acquaintances, but I'm going to assume they knew him a little bit better than I did. Now, here's the big question. Do Bolaño's lies hurt Nazi literature in the Americas as a work? No, I don't believe so. I think it's still a great book, one that's steeped in myth-making and myth-destroying. Bolaño builds up these fictitious fascists, describes their work as it is, and sends them to their grave, often deluded about the quality of their life's work. It is critical, though, that the fascists are real people with their own struggles, their own lives, their own ambitions, because evil isn't something that's bestowed upon certain people like it's a fucking lordship. No, it's because evil can occur in anyone, anywhere, for reasons that are beyond any of our comprehensions. That's the secret ingredient that makes the entries in this fictional encyclopedia so effective. Fictional though they may be, the effect of making the people in the entries so real is this. The Nazis, the fascists, the far-right lunatics, whatever you want to call them, they all fade into obscurity at the end of their entries. Whatever artistic merit their works may have somehow managed to obtain is forgotten, much like the artists themselves. If only there were some sort of message that one could learn from that.